To discuss Venezuela's current economic landscape, we're joined by Temir Porras, a foreign policy specialist. He served as a presidential assistant to the late Hugo Chavez for 10 years. Mr. Porras, thanks for joining us. How would you characterize the current economic situation in Venezuela?
Well, Venezuela is experiencing a deep economic recession as a product of a sharp fall in investment, a sharp fall in consumption, following the collapse in oil prices, which is the main economic resource for the country. And on the other hand, of course, there is a gigantic price volatility that has translated in very high inflation and very high consumption prices for the general public. So it's at the same time a mixture of economic downturn and high inflation.
Venezuela's inflation rate has been among the highest in the world for the last decade. Reuters established Venezuela's annual inflation over the 700 mark. Actually, it's considered hyperinflation. So how did Venezuela get to this point?
Well, I would make a distinction when you say during the last decade. I would make a distinction, for the period of the last 3 years. Specifically during the last 3 years, is that Venezuelan inflation has gone, out of control. In the period preceding those 3 years, we had high inflation, but I would say that was the normal inflation of Venezuela, 2 figures, and yes, since 2014, Venezuela has reached 3-figure inflation. The main problem here is that, on the one hand, of course, the country has been impacted by the sharp fall in oil prices. But on the other hand, authorities have been reluctant to implement any kind of macroeconomic adjustment and have been focusing in strengthening regulations and trying to keep prices under control with microeconomic policies, while most of the inflation has been generated. The origin of the inflation is generated at the macroeconomic level, and the authorities have been reluctant to implement any kind of adjustment. So we have reached this strange situation where the government is trying very hard to keep implementing social policies, has maintained a high level of social investment, but on the other hand, once again, in the actual market, the prices have gone out of control.
Why hasn't Maduro's government been able to manage what many call an economic crisis?
Well, first of all, there has to be something has to be done in the area of foreign exchange. As you probably know, Venezuela has a rather peculiar foreign exchange system with at least 3 different exchange rates. One is a controlled exchange rate, and there are several other exchange rates which are, I would say, closer to the market exchange rate. And this tremendous differential between these different exchange rates in a very import-dependent economy as Venezuela creates very large room for arbitrage and very large room for speculation. Therefore, this is what has been fueling the very high inflation in Venezuela. So, as a first measure, the Venezuelan authorities should focus on putting order in the front of foreign exchange policy.
Venezuela's main income comes from oil, and prices still haven't recovered at the pace some producers expect. What if prices never get over $100 a barrel? What will happen to Venezuela's economy then?
Well, one should take into consideration that for most of the Venezuelan history, oil prices have been under $100. Venezuelan economy is perfectly able to live with an oil price of 50, 60, or whatever the oil price is in the midterm. It is in my opinion unrealistic to imagine that Venezuela can only survive with an oil price of $100 a barrel. What it needs is for Venezuelan authorities and Venezuelan government to understand that once again a $50 barrel is a different world, and that some macroeconomic adjustments have to be made. For instance, it is impossible to imagine that the actual foreign exchange policy can be the same when you have a $100 barrel or when you have a $50 barrel. As soon as the authorities in the macroeconomic front show enough willingness to adjust the policies to the changing circumstances in the international economy, Venezuelan economy can do very well.
President Maduro recently introduced new higher currency bills into circulation. How is that working? Any change so far?
Well, we are starting to see the new bills, the new notes. I think this is just I would say an acknowledgement of the high levels of inflation. You know, the former notes and their denominations were highly unpractical because people had to carry, high amounts of notes and cash for day-to-day operations. Unfortunately, this monetary conversion has taken longer than it was envisaged at the beginning. But once again, this is just a recognition of the high levels of inflation. It's not going to change anything dramatically in the Venezuelan economic situation, if not that it will make it more practical for the general public to perform transactions, day-to-day transactions in the economy.
The region has seen inflation before. In the previous decade, Argentina, Peru, and Brazil had very high inflation. Those countries eventually experienced drastic political changes and eventually recovered. So what will it take for Venezuela to get out of this?
Well, once again, I think there's a demand for some degree of maturity in policy making. I don't believe that Venezuela's situation, even as bad as it can be today in the economic front, could be comparable to the hyperinflation some of the South American nations you were mentioning experienced in the 1980s and 1990s. It takes, once again, political responsibility. I think that both the government and the opposition should be focusing in addressing the economic problems, focusing in trying to reach an agreement to implement once again the economic adjustments that are required by the present situation. I believe that once again, with a certain degree of maturity in Venezuela, the economic recovery can be achieved without any, I would say, major political turmoil or major political change.
Temir Porras, thanks for joining us on America's Now.
Thank you for having me.
America's Now